I never thought I'd find home in a place covered in dust and grit, where the air tasted like limestone and every breath left a fine powder on your tongue. But that's exactly what happened the summer I took a job at Morrison's Quarry, desperate for something to fill the hollow space inside me after dropping out of my master's program and moving back to my hometown with nothing but failure weighing on my shoulders. The first day I showed up, I could barely look anyone in the eye. 26 years old and working a manual labor job I was wildly unqualified for, surrounded by men who'd been doing this work since they were 18. I felt like a fraud in my 2 new work boots and borrowed hard hat, trying to figure out which end of a shovel to hold while everyone else moved with the kind of easy confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're doing. That's when I met Jake. He was assigned as my partner, my trainer, the guy who was supposed to teach me the ropes and make sure I didn't accidentally kill myself or someone else in the process. I remember standing by the equipment shed that first morning, squinting against the early sun when this figure emerged from the dust cloud near the excavators. He was maybe 30, with arms that looked like they'd been carved from the same stone we were mining, wearing a faded gray tank top that had probably been black once upon a time. His face was already streaked with dust, even though the day had barely started, and when he pulled off his safety glasses to look at me, I saw these startling green eyes that seemed completely out of place in all that gray and brown. He didn't say much at first, just nodded, handed me a pair of gloves that actually fit, and said, "Stay close, watch everything, ask questions when we're not near the machines." His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much, but there was something gentle underneath the gruffness that made my shoulders drop just a fraction from where they'd been hunched up near my ears. Those first few weeks were brutal. My body ached in places I didn't know could ache. I'd go home every night and stand in the shower until the hot water ran out, watching the dust spiral down the drain, feeling like I was watching parts of myself disappear with it. The person who'd had plans, who'd been working on a thesis about postmodern literary theory, who'd imagined himself teaching at some university someday, all of it washing away with the limestone residue. But Jake was patient. He'd show me how to properly secure a load, how to read the signals from the crane operator, how to spot the grain in the stone so you knew where it would split. He never made me feel stupid, even when I definitely was being stupid. Like the time I left a tool bag on top of a rock that was about to be moved, and he just calmly retrieved it before the excavator came through, handed it back to me, and said, "You'll remember next time." I started watching him when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved when he was working, always sure, always purposeful. The way he'd pause sometimes and just look out over the quarry at the massive terraced walls of stone we'd carved into the earth, like he was seeing something beautiful where I only saw a giant hole. The way he'd check in with the newer guys, not just me, making sure everyone had water, that nobody was pushing themselves too hard in the heat. Around week 3, we were taking our lunch break in the shade of a massive boulder that had been deemed too flawed to process. Most of the guys ate in their trucks with the AC running, but Jake always sat out here and I'd started joining him. We'd eat in comfortable silence mostly, but that day he asked me, "So what's your story? You're not like the usual guys we get here." I could have lied, could have made something up, but there was something about the way he asked, like he actually wanted to know, like my answer mattered. So I told him about the master's program in literature, about how I'd loved it at first, about how somewhere along the way I'd stopped being able to read the books without feeling like I was suffocating, about the panic attacks in the library, about finally admitting I couldn't do it anymore and feeling like I was disappointing everyone who'd ever believed in me. He listened to all of it, eating his sandwich, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My dad wanted me to be a lawyer, had my whole life planned out. I tried for 2 years of pre-law before I realized I was making myself miserable trying to be what he wanted. This job?" He gestured at the quarry around us. "He didn't talk to me for 3 years when I took it, but I wake up not hating my life now, so I figure I made the right choice." It wasn't what I expected. I'd made assumptions, I realized, about who Jake was, about what kind of life someone working at a quarry must have. I felt ashamed of my own prejudices, of the way I'd been looking down at this job even while I was doing it. "The stone doesn't care about your degree," he continued, brushing crumbs off his jeans. It doesn't care about your plans or your parents' expectations. It just is what it is. There's something honest about that, something clean. Something shifted between us after that conversation. We talked more during breaks, about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up in the next town over, about his sister who was a nurse and his mom who made the best apple pie in 3 counties. I told him about the books I used to love, about my college roommate who'd become a lawyer and sent me encouraging texts I never knew how to answer, about my parents who were trying to be supportive but clearly didn't understand why their son was working at a quarry. I started noticing other things too. The way my heart would speed up a little when I saw his truck pull into the lot in the morning. The way I'd find myself replaying things he'd said while I was lying in bed at night, unable to sleep because my muscles were screaming. The way I'd catch myself staring at his hands, his arms, the curve of his neck when he tilted his head back to drink water. I'd known I was gay since I was 15, but I'd never really done anything about it. A few awkward hookups in college, one almost relationship that fizzled out after a month, a lot of watching from the sidelines while other people seemed to figure out this whole romance thing. I'd always told myself I was too focused on my studies, too busy, too something. The truth was, I was scared. Scared of wanting something, scared of being vulnerable, scared of all of it. But with Jake, the wanting came whether I was ready for it or not. It built slowly, like sediment settling, layer after layer, until it was something solid and undeniable. I didn't know what to do with it. He'd never mentioned a girlfriend or boyfriend, never talked about his personal life in that way. For all I knew, he was straight. And I was just setting myself up for the particular kind of pain that comes from falling for someone who can't fall back. Then came the day that changed everything. We were working in the deep part of the quarry, down where the walls rose 50 feet on either side and the sun only hit directly overhead. There was a load of stone that needed to be secured before the end of the shift, and we were rushing, trying to beat the clock. I was fastening a chain when I heard Jake shout, looked up, and saw a section of the wall starting to slide. Not a huge slide, maybe a few 100 pounds of loose rock, but more than enough to do serious damage. I froze, just completely locked up, watching it come down, my brain not connecting to my body. Then Jake hit me like a linebacker, wrapped his arms around me and rolled us both out of the path. We landed hard, him on top of me, and the rock crashed down right where I'd been standing, sending up a cloud of dust that choked out the sun. For a few seconds, we just lay there, his weight pressing me into the ground, both of us breathing hard. I could feel his heart hammering against my chest, could smell the sweat and dust and something underneath that was just him. Then he pushed up on his hands, looking down at me, and his face was so close I could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, could count the lines at the corners from squinting into the sun. "You okay?" His voice was rougher than usual, and his hands were on either side of my head, cradling it like something precious. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Just nodded, staring up at him, and something passed between us in that moment, something electric and terrifying and absolutely certain. His eyes dropped to my mouth just for a second, and I saw him swallow hard. Then the foreman was there, shouting, wanting to know if we were hurt, and Jake rolled off me, helped me to my feet. My legs were shaking. Everything was shaking. The foreman sent us home for the day, standard procedure after an incident, and we walked to the parking lot in silence. At my car, Jake stopped me with a hand on my arm. "Hey," he said, and I turned to look at him. "Come to my place. You shouldn't be alone right now. Adrenaline crash is real." I should have said no, should have gone home, processed what had happened, figured out what I was feeling. Instead, I heard myself say, "Okay." His apartment was small and neat, not what I expected somehow. Books on the shelves, actual books, everything from philosophy to mystery novels, plants in the windows, alive and healthy. A couch that looked comfortable, worn in the right ways. He got us both water, and we sat on opposite ends of that couch, drinking, not talking. Finally, he said, "I should have been paying closer attention, should have seen that wall was unstable." "You saved my life," I said. "Jake, you literally saved my life." He shook his head. "Just did what anyone would do." "No," I said, and I don't know where the courage came from. Maybe from almost dying, maybe from weeks of wanting, maybe from finally being too tired to be scared anymore. Not anyone. You. You did that. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something crack in his careful control. Marcus, he said, my name rough in his mouth, I need to tell you something, and it might make things weird, but after today I can't not say it anymore. My heart was doing that thing again, that speeding up thing, that thing that happened whenever he was close. Okay, I whispered. I'm gay, he said, the words coming out fast, like he'd been holding them in for a long time. And I have feelings for you. Have had them for weeks now. I know you're just here temporarily. I know this job isn't your real life. I know you're probably going to leave when you figure out what you actually want to do, but I need you to know. After today, after almost losing you, I need you to know. The relief that flooded through me was so intense it was almost painful. Jake, I said, and I was moving before I'd decided to move, crossing that couch, and then I was kissing him, finally kissing him, and he was kissing me back like he'd been waiting for this just as long as I had. His hands came up to cup my face, gentle despite their roughness, and he kissed me like I was something valuable, something worth saving. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard again, but for completely different reasons, he pressed his forehead to mine. I'm gay too, I said, and he laughed, actually laughed, this wonderful sound I'd never heard from him before. And I have feelings for you too. So many feelings I didn't know what to do with them. We spent that evening talking, really talking, about everything we'd been holding back. He told me about coming out to his family at 23, about his dad's rejection and his slow journey to accepting himself. I told him about my own coming out, easier in some ways because my parents were liberal and accepting, harder in others because I'd never really let myself want anything enough to risk getting hurt. You're allowed to want things, he said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. You're allowed to change your mind about what you thought your life would look like. You're allowed to be here, doing this, figuring it out. Over the next few months, we built something real. We were careful at work, professional, but after hours I'd go to his place or he'd come to mine, and we'd peel off the day's dust together in the shower, cook dinner, fall into bed and learn each other's bodies with the same careful attention Jake brought to Reading Stone. He taught me to see the Quarry differently, to find the beauty in it, the way the light hit the walls at sunset, turning everything gold and rose, the satisfaction of a clean split, rock giving way along its natural grain, the quiet pride in doing hard work well, in being part of a team, in building something even if that something was literally tearing something else down. I started to understand what he'd meant about the stone being honest. There was no pretense here, no performance. You were strong enough to do the work or you weren't. You paid attention or you got hurt. You showed up or you didn't. It was simple in a way. Nothing in academia had ever been simple. One Saturday, Jake took me to a part of the quarry we didn't usually work, a section that had been abandoned years ago and was slowly being reclaimed by nature. Wildflowers grew in the cracks. Small trees had taken root in accumulated soil. We climbed to the top of one of the walls and sat with our legs dangling over the edge, looking out over the whole operation. This is my favorite spot, he said. I come here sometimes when I need to think. You can see everything from here, but you're separate from it too. Like you can get perspective. I leaned against him, his arm coming around my shoulders automatically now, comfortably. I'm not leaving, I said. It was something we hadn't talked about directly, but I knew he was waiting for me to figure out my next move, to decide what came after this summer. I mean, I don't know what my long-term plan is, but I'm not leaving. Not yet. Not unless you want me to. He pulled me closer. I don't want you to. I know this isn't what you imagined for yourself, but maybe that's okay. Maybe what we imagine isn't always what we need. He was right. I'd imagined a life of books and lectures and intellectual conversations, and maybe someday I'd find my way back to parts of that. But right now, I needed this. The physical work that left me too tired to overthink, the simple pleasure of a job well done, the community of people who showed up every day and did hard things together, and most of all, I needed him. You know what I realized? I said, watching the sun start to dip toward the horizon. All that time I spent reading about people's lives, analyzing their choices, writing papers about meaning and purpose. I was never actually living. I was just thinking about living. This, right here, this is living. Jake pressed a kiss to my temple. Yeah, he said. It is. We sat there until the light started to fade, until the quarry below us became a landscape of shadows and the first stars started to appear. When we finally climbed down, I felt different somehow, lighter, like I'd left something heavy on top of that wall. The next week at work, I noticed Jake doing something I'd seen him do 100 times but never really understood. At the end of each day, before he got in his truck, he'd brush the dust off his shoulders with his hands, this deliberate gesture, like he was leaving the work behind before he went home. One evening, as we were walking to our cars, I saw him do it again, and without thinking, I reached out and brushed the dust off his shoulders too. He looked at me, surprised, and then his face softened into this smile I felt all the way through my chest. Come here, he said, and he brushed the dust off my shoulders in return, his hands lingering warm and solid. There. Clean slate for tomorrow. It became our ritual. Every day before we left, we'd dust the stone off each other's shoulders. It was practical, sure, but it was more than that. It was care. It was intimacy. It was this small acknowledgement that we were in this together, whatever this was, wherever it was going. I'm still at the quarry. It's been over a year now, and I'm not the same person who showed up that first day, terrified and lost and convinced I'd failed at life. I'm stronger now, not just physically, but in all the ways that matter. I know who I am. I know what I want. And what I want is this life I'm building, with this man who taught me that sometimes the thing you need finds you in the last place you'd ever think to look. We still take our lunch breaks by that boulder. We still climb up to the abandoned section on weekends and watch the sunset. We still dust the stone off each other's shoulders every single day, this small act of love and care that grounds me more than any academic theory ever did. Jake told me the other night, lying in bed in that space between sleep and waking, that he'd never imagined finding someone who understood him the way I do. I told him I'd never imagined finding someone who could see me, really see me, and love what they found. We're both discovering that life is full of things we never imagined, and maybe that's the whole point. The stone doesn't care about your plans. It just is what it is. And somehow, in learning to work with stone, in learning to read its grain and respect its nature, I learned to do the same with my own life. To stop fighting what I thought I should be and start accepting what I am. To find home not in achievement or status or meeting expectations, but in showing up every day, doing honest work, and loving someone who dusts the stone off my shoulders and helps me start each day clean.